So yesterday, the White House put out a press statement saying that their veto threat for the NDAA, because of the provisions about indefinite military detention, was no longer a threat, that they were backing down. And most people have looked at this as a major cave on the administration's part. And now, on one hand, I guess it can be seen as such, there are some very revealing words in the press statement as to why exactly they changed their mind. Here's a line of the statement that reads, "We have concluded that the language does not challenge or constrain the president's ability to collect intelligence, incapacitate dangerous terrorists, and protect the American people, and the president's senior advisors will not recommend a veto." So, does this prove the president was never really concerned about civil liberties being affected, but instead just his executive power to choose how to detain and prosecute people? Joining me to discuss this is Marcy Wheeler, blogger at emptywheel.net. Marcy, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And you and I have, we've spoken about this before, so let's kind of try to go through the timeline, or at least look at what it is that the president and the White House were thinking here. Originally, they issued this veto threat, but then after that threat, there was a little bit of, there were some changes in the language to the bill that they took out some of these required things that maybe the president would have more leeway. And now the veto threat's gone, right?
Right. I mean, there were two real bases for the administration's original veto threat. And one was a very legitimate and very laudable belief that the civilian legal system is actually better at, or certainly as good at, an important part of prosecuting terrorists as the military detention system. As you pointed out, I mean, they've already gotten 400 people in jail. They get longer sentences in civilian detention, and they have a fair amount of freedom of how they interrogate prisoners there anyway, and they're very successful at it. So I think part of it was legitimately that they were worried that FBI was going to be taken out of the counterterrorism business, and FBI is far better at it, frankly, than CIA or the military at this point. And there was language in there that said, none of this will affect the FBI's role. So that's how they addressed that part of the threat. But the other part is that some of the language that originally was in McCain-Levin, first of all, there was originally you couldn't use indefinite detention on U.S. citizens. They were exempted from it. And the administration asked them to take that out. The administration asked them to take the exemption for American citizens out of the indefinite detention language. In addition, there was language about basically repeating the AUMF for Afghanistan and expanding it a little and contracting it a little. And the administration also wanted something in writing that would say, and all of the other reasons, all of the other justifications the administration has used for indefinite detention still exist. One of those, actually, surprisingly, is still the Iraq War AUMF. As part of this process, Rand Paul tried to repeal it, and it went down. 67 senators voted against it. And there's a ton of language about terrorism in the Iraq War AUMF that we've seen administrations, both certainly Bush, we haven't seen the language that Obama has used, but we've seen them rely on that more generalized terrorism language for detention.
How odd, I guess you could say, right, considering that today Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta officially said that the Iraq War is over. You know, I'm happy, though, that I'm just cutting you off for 1 minute, though. I'm happy you brought up the fact that it was the administration, supposedly, that said take out the language or remove any restrictions on the ability to detain U.S. citizens. Senator Carl Levin actually is the one that started admitting that on the floor when this was being debated. We have a clip of him saying it.
I'm wondering whether the senator is familiar with the fact that the language which precluded the application of Section 1031 to American citizens was in the bill that we originally approved in the Armed Services Committee, and the administration asked us to remove the language which says that U.S. citizens and lawful residents would not be subject to this section.
All right, basically reiterating what you already said there, but, you know, I want to know what you think specifically when we start hearing this argument that the administration really caved by deciding not to veto this bill. For me, it doesn't really seem like much of a cave. It seems like they kind of got what they wanted, and it's very obvious now that civil liberties weren't ever what concerned them about this bill, and yet I feel like nobody out there is willing to just address that and to admit it and to speak openly about it.
Right. I mean, you know, they didn't get full civilian legal precedents. You know, as you said, we get closer to martial law with this. So the other part, the other laudable part of their opposition to this, they didn't really get. They just got some language saying, and in fact, importantly, Robert Mueller, who testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, said he still had concerns. So we know that the head of the FBI is not happy with the language that supposedly makes the FBI's role okay. And the only thing that's really left is this, and it's not just, I mean, I think the administration's concern is not just that they want to be able to indefinitely detain people, including American citizens, but the language that they use to justify the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, who, remember, is an American citizen, all comes out of this detention language. In fact, they actually cited some Supreme Court rulings that said, well, the police can chase somebody down, and if they kill him, if they use deadly force in chasing somebody down because he wouldn't be arrested easily, that's okay. They used that language on detention to authorize the killing of al-Awlaki. So I think that's one of the things they wanted to make sure, that they left the legal structures they put in place to justify the al-Awlaki killing, who's an American citizen, untouched. So it's not just that they wanted indefinite detention. They didn't want any restrictions on the language they've used to authorize themselves to kill American citizens without due process.
Well, so then what do you think, you know, to me, it's an incredibly scary development, and I'm happy that I think at least this is getting a little bit of attention out there, you know, as opposed to usually so much of this just gets swept under the rug. But what kind of a precedent does it set? You know, what legacy is this administration going to leave, and how much farther could it go? You know, now we have drones that are being used here by law enforcement in the U.S. I just wonder how much farther it'll go.
Well, and I saw a report today that in England, they are now calling Occupy Wall Street people in London, not here, but they're now calling them a terrorist threat. And so I think that's the concern, is you're going to begin to see additional groups considered terrorists. And again, the Iraq AUMF is very general. It says any terrorist who attacks the United States, that you know, it's not tied to Afghanistan. And I think that's when you're gonna, I mean, the drone-assisted arrest in North Dakota actually was members of the sovereign citizen movement, who are, you know, who the DOJ has kind of used terrorist type language for some of their indictments in the past. And so I think we're going to see, and we already are, we're going to see the Tea Party really opposing this, and they're, you know, they don't want a Democratic president to get to decide who gets detained and who doesn't. But I do think, you know, you're going to continue to see. And part of what's really important for people to understand is the administration's been relying on this theory anyway for the last 10 years, both the Bush and Obama administration. They've been doing it in secret. So we don't know what, besides the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, they've used detention language to authorize. We don't know that.
Well, you know, I guess on one hand, we hope there will be more transparency out of it, but unfortunately, now that it's law, you know, I think it might be a bit of a catch-22. Maybe if it's law, then we'll find out more, although it legally allows them to do it. But then at the same time, they kind of got to, you know, play around behind the scenes and then stretch the language to whatever way they wanted. But I think that it's a horrible and scary development. Marcy, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks. And happy Bill of Rights Day.
Thank you.